achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we're taking a look at the upcoming UFC on Fuel TV 8 event from Japan, featuring Wanderlei Silva taking on Bryan Stann in the main event, and that fight will go down on March 3rd, 2013. Now, as always, 6 main card predictions on this episode. All of my preliminary predictions will be available over at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so please check them out. Also, head over and make your predictions and make your picks in the public picks section. We'll see how those play out and see who's favoring who. And the bet packs, I'm coming off a very strong showing, 9-3 at UFC 157, including a number of very solid prop bets. First time ever I did a number one value bet as a prop, taking Lyoto Machida to defeat Dan Henderson by decision. I also said Uriah Faber, paying 4.5 to 1, would submit Ivan Menjivar, and he did submit him. So I had a very successful night with the bet packs, did very well. They're on sale for $5, $10, and $12 in the bet shop, so please check them out. Thank you very much to all of my sponsors as always. And we have 6 fights to cover, so let's get into the first prediction. Our first of 6 main card predictions takes place in the UFC's welterweight division as the stun gun Dong-Young Kim, 16-2-1 with 1 no contest, takes on Siyar the Great Bahadurzada, 21-4-1. Kim comes into this fight off a dominant performance over Paulo Thiago back in November, while Bahadurzada also coming off a win over Paulo Thiago, but that took place back in April when he knocked him out in only 42 seconds. Now, as I said, both coming off wins over Paulo Thiago. Bahadurzada's coming off. He's been out of action for 10 months, so a little bit of ring rust, and his UFC debut very short, so you wonder if he's got over some of those jitters with such a short performance. Now, Dong-Young Kim looked fantastic in his last fight, and it took place in Japan where this fight will be taking place as well. So we talk about the limited travel, which can help a guy who's not having to go east to west. And we'll see if that shows up here as well. Now, to put things in perspective as to how dominant Kim was in his win over Paulo Thiago, Thiago attempted 12 strikes and landed 4. Kim went 3 for 6 in his takedowns, complete dominant smothering top control. Now, he averages 3.4 takedowns per fight, roughly 50% completion rate. He's a 4th Dan black belt in judo, so very well versed in grappling. Only 1 win by submission, so not known for finishing. 9 wins by decision, but very, again, as I said, excellent top control. Bahadurzada, 11 wins by knockout, 48 seconds. That's all it took him to dispatch Thiago, so he has serious power. He also holds TKO wins over John Alessio and Evangelista Cyborg Santos. That one actually coming by injury. The way I look at it, he only needs to land once, but will he get the opportunity in this fight to connect? Kim does have 2 losses by knockout. One was to Maya, which was a TKO due to injury, but the legit one came against Carlos Condit, where Kim was put on wobbly street with a flying knee. Now, on the other side, Bahadurzada submitted twice in his career. George Santiago caught him with a heel hook, and Kazu Masaki got him by guillotine. And he has had trouble in the past with grappling-based opponents. 15 of his 26 fights have finished inside the first round, while 3 of his 4 losses have come in fights going longer than round 1. So the big question is, if Kim can start dragging this fight into the second half, will that impact Siyar's ability to perform and fight? Kim needs to be very mindful when he closes the distance, but after he gets there, clinch, control the takedowns, smother, drop ground and pound, remain active, don't allow this fight to get stood up, do what he did against Paulo Thiago, who's a very competent grappler, far more than Siyar is. And as far as Siyar Bahadurzada, he needs to use his movement, make every chance he gets to strike count, and land with power. I don't think he's going to do that, so my prediction is Dong-Young Kim to defeat Siyar Bahadurzada by decision. Our next prediction comes to us in the UFC's featherweight division as Mizuto Pugnis Hirota, 14-5-1, battles 17-7-0 Hani Yahya. Hirota's coming off an absolutely disgusting decision defeat against Pat Healy, in which I felt he was completely robbed. That was his lone Strike Force appearance before moving over to the UFC. Yahya, on the other hand, submitted Josh Grisby, the recently cut Josh Grisby, in his last appearance. Now, looking at Hani Yahya first, he's a second-degree black belt. 15 of his 17 wins have come by submission. Tapped out guys like, as I said, Grisby, Eddie Wineland, and Mark Hominick. Very good on the ground. When he fought Mendez did a nice job avoiding takedowns, putting Yahya on the mat, and then immediately disengaging because he knows how tough Yahya is, how tough he is to handle on the ground. Now, he has a poor takedown completion percentage, 27%. He does average 2.53 takedowns per fight, but he has to attempt a lot. May only need 1 takedown in most situations, as was the case against Grisby, but he's 2-6 in fights that don't end by submission. One of those fights, though, one of those 2 victories, was an impressive win over Mike Brown. He went 3 for 11 on his takedown attempts. He continually was diving on singles and looking for Brown to engage, and then sweeping and gaining the advantage on the mat. His striking is relatively poor. He uses a lot of kicks, and generally speaking, it's used to set up his grappling. He's been knocked out a couple of times. Joseph Benavidez and Ken Yamamoto handing him those defeats. Now, looking at Hirota, one loss by submission in which Shin Aoki snapped his arm, which was, disgusting. Former Sengoku and Deep lightweight champions. I think he's better suited to fight at featherweight than fighting at 155, which he did against Pat Healy. This should show up in the strength and the exchanges if they do get in tight. He has grappling skills, but at the basis, he is a pure striker, and he has 8 wins by knockout to show for his power. Against Healy, though, he shocked a lot of people. He was able to use takedowns, nice clinch and trip work. But again, he needs to avoid grappling against Yahya at all costs. Now, one thing he did effectively against Healy, when he did grapple, he established the underhooks, which allowed him to control the position. And if he does get drawn in with Yahya, he needs to continue that trend. Again, when Healy shot, and this will be the same case when Yahya shoots, he does a nice job of scrambling, sprawls, works his way out of early takedown positions, and that's something that he needs to do. If Yahya can get him to the mat, it's really his world. If Hirota keeps it standing, it's to his advantage. Now, against Healy, he showed very crisp boxing, changed levels nicely, has a nice left hook, led with a body shot, and then went upstairs with his hands. Not a lot of kicks, which actually should help him to avoid giving Yahya opportunities to take him down. But again, he needs to be very careful that he doesn't close the distance too much and allow Hani to at least tie him up and initiate some grappling-based exchanges. In the past, Yahya has had to rely on his opponents to initiate the grappling. I think Hirota will do a nice job of using his boxing and movement to avoid that situation. And he's been hurt on the feet before. He's been knocked out. Grisby caught him, and I think Hirota will do a nice job of circling, avoid the takedowns, do damage with his hands. So my prediction is Mizuto Hirota to defeat Hani Yahya by decision. In the middleweight division, Yushin Thunder Okami 29-7-0 battles former Bellator middleweight champion Hector Lightning Lombard 32-3-1 with 1 no contest. Okami is coming off back-to-back wins over Buddy Roberts and Alan Belcher, while Lombard picked up his first UFC victory over Husamar Palhares via knockout at UFC on FX Soteropoulos versus Pearson back in December. Now, first things noticeable in this fight, size advantage for Okami, at least on paper. 6'2" versus 5'9". He actually has a 2-inch reach advantage. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. Now, Hector Lombard is a very physically powerful fighter, likes to use a lower stance, which should help him to defend against Okami's takedowns. And that lower center of gravity he's going to have because of the height, quote-unquote, disadvantage, could allow him to help get underneath of Okami and control him along the cage when these guys are pummeling forward position. So we'll have to see how that plays out, if there is actually an advantage for Okami or if it actually works in the favor of Lombard. Now, both guys are high-level judo practitioners. Okami, a black belt in judo, versus Lombard is a 4th-degree black belt in judo and also a BJJ black belt. So a slight grappling advantage, I would say, to Hector Lombard based on credentials. We'll have to, again, see how this plays out inside of the cage. Now, guys, both guys average less than 2 takedowns per fight at roughly 50% of a completion rate, but it's their takedown D that's impressive. Okami, 83% takedown D, and Lombard, 91%. Both went 0 for 9. And again, we'll see how that plays out. I think the bigger issue there is for Okami. If he cannot get Lombard to the ground, that's really going to put him in a tough position. He uses takedowns very effectively, as we saw in the Alan Belcher fight, where he completely nullified Alan Belcher's offense when he was able to take him down. He has smothering top control, 13 wins by decision, a lot of it because he's able to cut guys off and put them on the mat and completely take their offense out of the equation. Now, again, if Okami can get Lombard to the ground, he could gas him out, and that could be a big thing, so we have to question Lombard's gas tank, and that could show up in this fight as well, especially if it goes into the second half. Concerning area of the grappling exchanges in the Belcher fight is Okami kept landing on the bottom when they were initially clinched and went to the ground, and you cannot afford to do that against a guy like Hector Lombard, who has serious power from the top and will do damage and will not give up the position like Belcher seemed to continue. Okami is able to get out of that position. He'll struggle to do that against Hector Lombard. Now, Okami, 10 wins by knockout, and his striking is improving. He uses his punches effectively to close the distance. Again, we saw it against Belcher, throwing 3 and 4 punch combinations while moving forward, and he has to do that against Lombard, because if he does not, he will get clipped on the way in, and that could be the end of his night. Now, Lombard, 18 wins by knockout, 7 wins by submission. He's never been finished, so capable of finishing a fight no matter where it goes. He was much more active against Paul Harris when he compared it to his Boach fight. He looked much more effective, walking him down and landing big shots. And now Okami, he was taking a lot of damage at range when he fought Alan Belcher, and when he closes the distance to engage Hector, it's going to put him in range of Hector's power, and that's a big problem for him if Hector's able to start landing flush. I really question Okami's reactions when he gets hit. We saw what happened. He froze up against Tim Bosch, and same thing with Anderson Silva. And I don't want to put Anderson Silva and Hector Lombard striking on the same level, but if Lombard hits him and Okami doesn't react well, Lombard's going to pounce and finish this fight, and I actually think that's what's going to happen. So my prediction is Hector Lombard to defeat Yushin Okami by TKO. In the lightweight division, surely crowd favorite, the Fireball Kid Takanormi Gomi, 34-8-0 with 1 no contest, battles returning lightweight Diego the Dream Sanchez, 25-5-0. Gomi's won back-to-back fights in the UFC, including the last time the company went to Japan. While Diego Sanchez is coming off a loss to Jake Ellenberger at welterweight, and making his return to lightweight, where his last fight was a title fight loss against BJ Penn. Now, looking at Gomi first, he's a dangerous striker. He likes to paw it with his right jab as a rangefinder. He has serious power. He was able to drop Matt Danzig with a right hand. Does a nice job. He showed effective level changes, working the head and body. And he was doing some counter-striking in that fight and using leg kicks more effectively than he has in the past. He just looked much better against Danzig in that fight. On the ground, he scored an early double leg takedown, and he has had trouble in the past with submission losses and the grappling, so he's been working his wrestling to try and tighten that up. But still, if the fight goes to the ground, he's certainly vulnerable, and we saw Danzig attempt a couple of early submissions. Now, at the same time, flipping the scenarios, Danzig was scoring some nice takedowns, setting them up with the strikes, and it'll make Gomi hesitate if Diego is able to do something similar and force him to really think, well, what's he going to do next? Now, he has a tendency to be a bit of a slow starter. We saw him in the AG Mitsuoka fight get off to a slow start. He was very hesitant against Clay Guida, and I think that comes back to the concerns about being taken down. And you cannot afford to be a slow starter against Diego Sanchez, who, again, in his fight with Clay Guida, he just came out firing and just gets going right from the start. He also has a tendency to hold his hands a little bit low, and that makes him vulnerable to a left hook over the top, which if that connects from a guy like Diego, who's a physically larger lightweight, that's going to be a serious issue. Now, I felt he looked better against Mac Danzig. I also felt Mac Danzig won that fight, though. He outlanded and scored more takedowns, and I thought he just deserved it. I thought Gomi got the nod where it was much closer than expected. And he was slowing down in the third. His conditioning is certainly questionable. Now, Diego's returning to lightweight, and he likes to fight at a high pace, and that's something that should benefit him here. He will brawl and unload high-volume striking combinations on his opponent, but he needs to be very careful not to be clipped in an exchange by a guy like Gomi who can put you out with one shot. Ask Tyson Griffin. He has been dropped in the past. We saw Martin Kampmann again. That's against bigger guys at welterweight. And again, he was struggling with the technical striking of Kampmann and Ellenberger. Gomi, technical, but not nearly on the same level, at least for a guy like Martin Kampmann. Diego should have a size advantage and a speed advantage, along with a cardio edge, which all should show up in this matchup. 21% takedown completion rate, not exactly that impressive, but he averages 1.77. If he gets on top of Gomi, he should be able to control the position, beat him up. He has 9 wins by submission. I don't think he'll look to submit Gomi. I think he'll look to grind on him, beat him up, take away that cardio, and really make him a non-factor when the fight does return to the feet at the end of rounds. At the beginning of rounds. A couple concerns for Diego is the weight cut and the trip from west to east could impact him. I felt it impacted Mac Danzig a little bit, but I don't think it'll be enough to cost him the fight. So my prediction is Diego Sanchez to defeat Takanori Gomi by decision. In our co-main event of the night, we're in the heavyweight division. The Super Samoan Mark Hunt, 8-7-0, battles Stefan Skyscraper Struve, 29-5-0. Mark Hunt has won 3 fights in a row since making his official UFC debut, while Stefan Struve riding a 4-fight winning streak. Now, again, physical mismatch. I want to talk about that right off the bat. 5'10" Mark Hunt against 7-foot-tall Stefan Struve, and an 83-inch reach for Struve against 74 for Mark Hunt. If you don't have a calculator on you, that's a 14-inch height advantage and 9 inches of reach. So Struve certainly has that notch in his favor. But Hunt has fought taller men before. We saw him fight against Ben Rothwell in Czech Congo, and he took on Sammy Schilt, who's 6'11" in a kickboxing match. So this is not something out of the ordinary for Mr. Hunt. Now, submissions have accounted for 6 of Hunt's 7 defeats. He's been tapped out by Fedor, Overeem, Barnett, Gegard Mousasi, and Sean McCorkle. It's funny to include McCorkle in this list of fighters anyway. Now, Struve, 4 of his 5 defeats have come by knockout. JDS, Big Country, Travis Brown, but he's only been stopped once in his last 7 fights, so he appears to be working on that. Now, Struve has certainly been putting it together lately. He wins over his last 4 opponents: LeVar Johnson, Pat Barry, Stipe Miocic, and Dave Herman, they have combined for 44 of 55 of their wins have come by knockout or TKO, so he's certainly been fighting guys who are dangerous. Now, Hunt has won 3 in a row, and subs have accounted for 21 of the 80 wins of the 3 men he has beaten in that span, so he's fought guys with capabilities of submitting him as well. But either way, you can see both these guys appear to be cleaning up and working on some of the issues they've had in the past. Now, Struve was a bit of a slow starter. He was getting hit frequently by Pat Barry, Dave Herman, and Miotic in the first round of that fight, but he does a nice job of covering up well. But against Mark Hunt, you can't afford to let Mark Hunt hit you because you might not get another opportunity if he does land one clean on your chin. Struve really hasn't started to use his reach until recently, where he allowed fighters to close the distance, but he's been using the jab more effectively and keeping them at bay, and if he can really utilize that, that'll make it very difficult for you to land, especially a guy like Mark Hunt, for a guy to land with regularity. He did a nice job of baiting LeVar Johnson and subbing him on the cage, where he was able to tie him up and utilize those long limbs, and that's where his long limbs he has done a nice job in the past, is on the ground. Now, Hunt has brutal low kicks, and if he can use them to unload on Struve, it'll take away some of his mobility and will cut the distance down, which is something he needs to find a way to do. Now, the winning streak for Mark Hunt has been very impressive, but you look at some of the guys he's beat. Chris Tuchscherer, not that big of a name. Ben Rothwell gassed hard in that fight, and Hunt was in trouble, at least early on. And the Czech-Congo fight was impressive, but it was quick. So, I don't want to build him up too much. I'm sure I'll get flamed for saying that. Now, if Hunt can land a big shot, he can stop Struve, but getting in range for him is going to be very tricky. He should spend the first round battering it with leg kicks and avoid getting in clinching range. Now for Struve, he needs to use his reach and then get Hunt to the ground ASAP to look for submissions. Hunt has been out of action for over a year and could suffer from some ring rust, which should impact him in this fight, especially at his age. Both guys have continued to win as underdogs and defy the odds, but that ends here for Mark Hunt. My prediction is Stefan Struve to defeat Mark Hunt by submission. In the main event of the evening, Wanderlei, the axe murderer Silva, 34-12-1 with 1 no contest, takes on Bryan, All-American Stann, 12-5-0. Silva is coming off a defeat to Rich Franklin at UFC 147, while Stann dropped a decision at UFC 152 to Michael Bisping. Now this fight is actually taking place at 205, even though both guys have spent their time recently fighting at middleweight. Stann's a former WEC champion at this weight class, and Silva a former Pride middleweight champion, which is the light heavyweight equivalent. Now, Silva's been fighting kind of on the UFC senior circuit, taking on guys like Rich Franklin, Kung Lee, and a little while ago Chuck Liddell, but every time he seems to come off and fight a more current fighter, it seems to catch up with him. Silva only 3 wins in his last 10 fights. Notably, he did defeat Michael Bisping, but and that's arguably his best performance in the last number of years. He is capable of scoring knockouts, 24 wins. He stopped guys like Keith Jardine, Kung Lee recently. He dropped Rich Franklin, and he hurt Bisping at the end of that matchup. He needs to be able to get on the inside against Bryan Stann and flurry with a kamikaze-style attack, but if he fails like he did in the Franklin fight to put him away, his cardio is going to be shot, and that's going to be a big impactor on this fight. And when he moves in like he did against Chris Leben and he attempts to brawl, it also leaves him vulnerable to getting knocked out. It would appear the wars he's fought are catching up with him. 6 losses by knockout, which accounts for 50% of his defeats. Guys like Chris Leben, Rampage Jackson knocking him out. And Bryan Stann has significant power. 9 of his 12 wins have come by knockout. He stopped guys like Alessio Sakara. Also, he took out Chris Leben, George Santiago. He has big-time power, and that's a big issue for Wanderlei. Now, Stann's striking is relatively simple, but very effective. He likes to catch his opponents in flurries when he forces them away from their technique, and he has power in his hands to do so, like I said, and that's something Wanderlei's going to engage him with. He will oblige. Now, he clipped Bisping in round 1, but he struggled with Bisping's speed and takedowns, and that's something we have to be concerned with. Now, Stann has been stopped once in his career. Steve Cantwell did it to him back in the WEC, but it's been a little while since that, and we see he's cleared up some striking deficiencies at least. The biggest area of concern for Stann is his takedown defense. It's improving, but still vulnerable. He has an improving ground game, as I said, and he's got some decent ground and pound. 2 losses by sub, and he was dominated in a matchup by Phil Davis that went to the ground constantly. But that's not a threat for Wanderlei Silva, at least we haven't seen it. His cardio isn't amongst elite, but he should be better than Wanderlei Silva's, especially if this fight goes into the later rounds with it being a 5-round fight. Stann is a threat in the area that Wanderlei has struggled with mostly, which is knockouts. Flipping the tables, Silva is not a threat as a wrestler. He only has 3 wins by submission in 48 career fights, so he's not going to be able to expose the issues that Bryan Stann has had. Well, vice versa, Stann has the ability to expose Wanderlei's biggest shortcomings. Silva will oblige Stann to stand and trade, and while Silva has power, chin versus chin, it certainly favors Stann based on the stats and past fighter history. Wanderlei needs to pick, fight a smart fight, work the perimeter, and strike and be technical. But I don't think he can win a fight like this, because I think Stann will be able to close the distance and drag him into that brawl and eventually catch him. So my prediction is Bryan Stann to defeat Wanderlei Silva by knockout. So those are my 6 main card predictions for the upcoming UFC on Fuel TV 8 event, which will take place in Japan. So again, check your time to make sure you don't miss the event, because it won't be at the regular time. You can check out all of my preliminary predictions over at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Please go over and bet at not bet, but place your picks in the public picks section of my website. You can also check out the panel's predictions. My betting packs will be available, and certainly consider investing in them, because there's always opportunities to make money, and all the information, the more information you can get, the better off. We have a little bit of a break coming up. World Series of Fighting is the next event. I'm not going to do a video for that event. I'm actually going to do some picks on my website, so please keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much, as always, for tuning in, and I'll see you back here next time.